Hello and welcome to the National Security Conversation. In this special episode of the NSC, I will be discussing the ongoing military standoff between India and China on the line of actual control. With the entire world fighting COVID-19, the biggest crisis that humanity has faced since the end of the Second World War, a military standoff between two nuclear neighbors is the last thing anyone would have wanted. But some people in Beijing seem to think differently. There have been reports of Chinese aggression near the Pangong Lake in Ladakh and the Nakula in Sikkim, both in this very month. According to some reports, and I quote, since the third week of April, more than 5,000 Chinese soldiers of the People's Liberation Army have intruded into 5 points in Ladakh on the Indian side. For the record, transgressions by the People's Liberation Army to the Indian side is really nothing new. On an average, around 400 transgressions take place every year. But what is worrying is the following. The recent transgressions are at locations where there has never been a dispute about the alignment of the line of actual control between India and China. More so, these actions seem to be well coordinated and planned at the highest level in Beijing. So what is the Chinese rationale behind this unprecedented move? What does Beijing intend to achieve by this? Is Beijing sending a message to New Delhi? And how should New Delhi respond to this bullying behavior by the Chinese government? To discuss this, I have with me three distinguished panelists. Ambassador Nirupama Rao was India's Foreign Secretary and was India's ambassador to the United States and Beijing. Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia was India's Director General of Military Operations. He also commanded the Sukhna Corps of the Indian Army. Ajai Shukla is a well-known journalist. He is currently with the Business Standard newspaper and is a retired colonel from the Indian Army. Welcome to the show, Ambassador Rao, General Bhatia and Ajai Shukla. Ajay, let me begin with you. You wrote in the Business Standard on the 23rd of May, for the first time since the Kargil incursions of 1999, Indian territory is in the hands of foreign soldiers. Starting in the third week of April, more than 5,000 Chinese soldiers of the PLA have intruded into 5 points in Ladakh, 4 along the Galwan River and 1 near Pangong Lake. This is a very serious claim. Could you please put this in context for us? What is the significance of this? And why has the government not acknowledged this so far?
Well, first of all, regarding the numbers themselves, Happymon, 5,000 seems like a sort of unusually large number, and it is. But the fact is that the numbers are probably even higher than that if you count all the separate intrusions that have taken place over a fairly wide sector. So the Chinese are here in strength, and they are here sort of clearly with a aim and a purpose. And the question that comes in is, why have they chosen areas that they have? And most worrying of all is the choice of the Galwan River, right? Because that is the one place where there is a settled Chinese claim line. The Chinese themselves have actually enunciated several times that our claim line is here and no further. And when they cross that claim line that they themselves have asserted, then clearly there is a statement being made here that we are acting against India. We are not just sort of recovering territory, because you've gone beyond what you are claiming over here. Now, it also has to be kept in mind that the Galwan area itself has been an area of steadily expanding claims. First, China laid its claim out in a 1956 map. Then it modified that in 1959, 1960, when they had the official dialogue. The Chinese claimed that. Then that claim line was again modified after 1962, when they actually physically captured the Galwan post and added another 2,000 square kilometers to the Chinese claim. But now they've gone even beyond that claim line that they have already modified 3 times. So the question that really comes in is, why is China making such a powerful statement? And in addressing that question, I guess the political leadership needs to keep that big picture in mind.
So why is the political leadership not acknowledging what is happening? Is that the right thing or the wrong thing to do?
If I was the political leadership of this country, I would be downplaying the incident in order to have a certain freedom of maneuver for myself. The more this is coming into the public domain, the more pressure is being generated on the Indian government to do something. So far, they've managed to sort of manage the information flows reasonably well. They've put out their version of the story that India is taking, concerted action to counter the Chinese aggression. But as and when the pressure builds, as it did at Doklam, as it did in the run up to 1962, the government will find its scope of action severely circumscribed. And to that extent, it needs to have as little public opinion, public attention, I beg your pardon, as possible on this particular event.
Ajay, you are saying that the government has done the right thing by sensibly not sensationalizing this. General Bhatia, what is your take on this this particular argument that Ajay is making? In fact, the army chief, General Narawane, said that there have been incidents in Ladakh and also in Sikkim on the 9th of May, which led to injuries caused by the aggressive behavior by both sides. And he also said that the two sides have been disengaged at this point of time. Do you think the de-escalation disengagement has happened? Or, as Ajay is pointing out, perhaps the government wants to downplay this, and as he says, sensibly so. What's your take on this?
I would like to give my assessment based on what is available in the open domain. I have no knowledge of what exactly is happening. But if there are more than 5,000 troops in the area of what we generally call Aksai Chin and subsector North, I think it is a bit too much for even the PLA to sustain out there, knowing the terrain and the area. We have to look at the positive factors as to why should he do what he is doing, and thereafter what next and what do we do. The Indian position is, I think, very, very clear. We've been followed this position for many years now. It amounts to no blinking, no blink mention. So we are not, and China understands that. We have seen it in Dolam, which is Doklam, which we are generally known Doklam now. We've seen it in Chumar in 2014 and Depsang in 2013 and a little earlier also. So we have stood firm wherever we are there and where we come from the standoffs and all. And the 5 agreements on which the peace and tranquility is based is there. And both PLA and the Indian Army and the border management forces like the ITBP have abided by it. So what is new about this? That is the key question. Why is the PLA doing what is reportedly it's doing? Now, the Shok-Daulat road was started some time back. It's been operationalized now. So that is definitely a vulnerability because it leads up right to Karakoram Pass. China has always claimed areas, and like Ajay said, it's moving westwards. That is definitely there. They have also come into the plains, the Kalman River, the Chivan Nala, and a little beyond also. But that is also to reinforce their claims in the area. We have to understand that the line of actual control is a line of perceptions. It does not have a common understanding. We have our own line of perception of the LAC. China has its own line of perception of the LAC. We have the Chinese perception of the line of LAC, which we have plotted over the years by the patrolling activities. And similarly, Chinese have our perception. But the only thing I would like to say is, we are in the month of May. That is the time when transgressions normally happen. And India has created infrastructure. And as infrastructure has been created out there, we will find more and more face-offs. These will be more in intensity, more in depth, more in scope, and more in frequency. But what the question needs to answer is, post the Wuhan meeting, informal meeting between the Prime Minister Modi and President Xi, the strategic guidance is given, and we had nearly, since September 2017, no major face-offs or standoffs took place along the line of actual control. So why now? Is it got something to do with the COVID-19 situation, the emerging world order? It's got something which is at the strategic level, because I think it's part of the strategic signaling which goes on. And China does believe in the military coalition, which it has done for whenever it wants to. And it has to understand that India today is a new India, it's a responsible India, it's a citizen India, it's a resurgent India. So possibly the build-up that is which Ajay is talking about is for a long haul, which PLA is likely preparing for.
Thank you. Janwati, let me take that to Ambassador Menon. Ambassador Menon, you have been India's Foreign Secretary and also our ambassador to Beijing. What is your take on this sort of unfolding situation? What's your big picture assessment, as it were? What explains the timing of this assertive Chinese behavior on the LAC?
Yes, thank you. Well, in terms of the timing, if you just take a worm's eye view of what is happening along the line of actual control, this is the time of the year when throughout we've seen heightened activity by patrols, particularly from the Chinese side, leaving telltale signs, pitching tents, making inroads. So this we have to gird ourselves and prepare ourselves for more such activism along the line of actual control, especially where there are pockets of difference. In terms of the larger picture, I'm reminded of an analogy that Edward Luttwak made the other day. He said China is that growingly obese individual who is making claims and squeezing people. You know, imagine yourself with this growingly obese individual in an elevator, for instance. And, this person is squeezing and, leaving very little space for you. So I'm reminded of that. Of course, given the situation generated by COVID-19 and the fact that the Chinese, even as they go on the offensive in areas along the border, are very much on the defensive when it comes to diplomatic influence and diplomatic image making, even as they try and deliver PPEs and do medical diplomacy everywhere. I think they're very much on the back foot today. And within China, you have a leader, you have Xi Jinping, who, I don't know if he really has understood the way of to a lot of galleries within China, dialing up the hyper-nationalistic tendencies which go across very well with people, especially a younger generation, that since Tiananmen Square has been brought up on this diet of the fact that China will no longer take any humiliation, not that they've had to take any humiliation from India. We've been, I think, very reasonable and good neighbors if you look at our conduct over the last decades, especially since the 1962 conflict. But it is worrisome, this activism, which in a way mirrors what they're trying to do in the South China Sea, how they're trying to elbow out their smaller Southeast Asian neighbors. All in all, it doesn't really behave very well as far as the Chinese are concerned, and it should make us worry about what and where this is all going to lead to. I'm happy that the Indian government has been low-key in its response. I think we're very much guided by the playbook of the last decades along the line of actual control in terms of shots being fired and exchanged since October 1975. But the question, the $64,000 question today is whether the situation will hold indefinitely. Chinese foreign policy, if you look at the last 1,500 years of Chinese dealings with the outside, tell me, when has their foreign policy succeeded? Do they really understand what diplomatic influence? Very often you can say they have stratagems. They have various stratagems that they deploy, whether it's the border or whether it's their neighbors or whether it's in relations with the US. But I see an absence of a strategy, and I don't think you can apply Sun Tzu, word for word and diktat for diktat to relations with neighbors.
Right. Ajay, if I may come to you, what is the strategic significance of this of the region that the Chinese troops are now encroached into? Is it a piece of territory that is part of a larger plan that the Chinese have for? Why is this piece of land important to the Chinese at this point of time? Is there any particular reason behind this? I'm talking about Ladakh.
I think, before I sort of address your question directly, I'll just take on from what Nirupama Rao just said. I have to say that while I agree with her that China's diplomacy has been on the back foot and that it has not been successful in most of its diplomacy, I think China today is at that stage where it says, and internally this is accepted across China, that diplomacy is for the weak. We are power players. And the actions that we are seeing on the border, and including this action, is flowing out from this belief that we are powerful, we are strong, we can make things happen, and we don't need to engage in diplomacy or be powerful or be popular because we are powerful. But coming to your question directly, what is the strategy that is guiding something like this? It is important to note that seeing the geographical spread of these intrusions, all the way from northern Ladakh to Sikkim in 4 different spots, it is absolutely clear that this is not some local commander taking things into his action into his own hands. This is being coordinated from Beijing itself, which brings you to the question automatically of why is Beijing doing this? What is it trying to gain? As far as the location goes, the Galwan area where they and the Pangong Tso area where they put the bulk of their thrust. If you read the Sina Defense website, which is very close to the PLA, which is acknowledged as reflecting the PLA viewpoint, it's almost crowing. It's saying that when we incurred at Doklam, we were at a geographical and a tactical disadvantage. Over here, we are at a tactical advantage and we can do whatever we want to do. So there's a certain belief that they've chosen their spot. They are going to sort of push this through all the way. And that brings you to the question of what is their demand going to be? If it's something that has been coordinated all the way from Beijing, my logic goes, then it's not some local level demand to do with infrastructure or with sort of behavior, patrolling behavior on the border or something like that. It's more likely to be a strategic or an economic demand centered on perhaps on India's sort of pressure on it with the world community on the way it's handled COVID, or possibly on, on our access denial to Chinese companies for foreign direct investment, or the keeping out of Chinese 5G companies from the Indian 5G market. I suspect that the demand is going to be something at this strategic and national level. And that is something which will have to be negotiated between the government and Beijing itself. And I don't think we're going to hear a lot about it, which is why I'm sort of the viewpoint that the less pressure you put on our own government, the better they'll be able to handle it.
Interesting. So in other words, the Chinese are militarily escalating for political or diplomatic concessions from India at this point of time. That seems to be a difficult proposal for the government of India to give in, at least publicly. So to that extent, I think you're right about keeping quiet about it. Vinod Bhatia, let me come to you. You wrote in the Tribune the other day that having commanded the Sukna Corps, the recent face-off at Nakula in North Sikkim, reportedly leading to a scuffle and injuries to soldiers on both sides, came as a surprise to me. Now, tell us a little more about your experience in dealing with the PLA troops and officers while you were commanding the Sukna Corps. What are your impressions of these guys on the LSC?
That's a very interesting question. Rather, you see, having been on the line of actual control a couple of tenures, Nakula is different actually. We never had the road to Moguthong sector. We built the road. So we have the access to the Nakula Pass now. So you see, it is infrastructure development. Moment you have access to roads, your face-offs will increase. Like I say, the PLA over the years invested in the 3 Rs: roads, radars, and reserves. So they could, they could come to wherever they wanted to come. We had to foot it out. We took a longer time reaching there. We didn't do the surveillance means. Now that we have the infrastructure development, we have the access, we have certain surveillance means. So that is why you'll find that the frequency of face-offs will increase. That is a given. And there's nothing to it. They have their own claim, we have our own claim, and we understand each other very well. And like Ambassador Rao said, we are the last short angle of October 1975. So we have maintained it very well, the peace and tranquility. So it is time-tested base. But the fact remains that this has the potential to spiral into a skirmish, into something bigger. In this particular, we're in the month of May now, May end is COVID-19, the uncertainty in the world. There are too many things which are happening. So we have to understand what are the strategic signals, if any, China is sending. Whether it's only at the operational, the military level, operational level, it's a tactical level, or is it more? As Ajay said from Beijing, then what could be the positive factors? What do we need to address? And like I said, India today is not going to blink. That China understands that. It has seen in the past. Dolam was one of them. We didn't blink at all. And they were a tactical disadvantage out there. We may be at a tactical, I would say, disadvantage. So we'll have to actually look at what do the Chinese really want? What next? We have to understand this is a part of the 3 warfare things, and they have a non-contact warfare. Are they looking at CPEC? Because in India, we have been talking, we've been actually, rightly so or wrongly so, I'm not getting into that. We were talking of integrating POK and Pakistan with us. We had Article 370 being abrogated. We had the map being issued in October end of Ladakh. So all these things have to be seen, put together, put in a in the whole thing, and let's see what the Chinese aims are. That will be very important. It is not that if it is happening from Beijing, that is the premise. If it's not happening from Beijing, it's a tactical level. We'll resolve it.
Right. Ambassador Rao, interestingly, Ajay made this point that this is perhaps a military escalation in order to gain certain political and diplomatic concessions from India. Now, how do we respond to this kind of a situation? Because this is probably not about a small piece of territory here or there. It is probably not about an immediate dispute about the line of actual control or a small chunk of territory. This is probably a larger game. So how do we push back a growing big bully in our neighborhood? Is that going to be a military pushback? Is that going to be diplomatic pushback? What is your advice?
I think a pushback can happen on various fronts. First of all, where the areas are concerned, where these things are happening, obviously we have to stand our ground, and we have stood up and done that through all these years. So there's really no alteration that is required on that side. But how we push back, one option would be to try geo-economic retribution responses or policies that can somehow signal to the Chinese that it's not going to be business as usual. And even as we have been low-key and dignified, as if we are not deeply concerned about it, and that we construe this activity as unfriendly, as antagonistic. Of course, PLA, like the diplomatic community, has obviously received orders from above that they have to, they have to be assertive, they have to show muscle, flex where required. So China's peaceful rise is well behind them, it would appear. In my own experience, I think it dates back really not just to Xi Jinping, but even before. If you look at the 2008-2009 financial crisis, and a time when the Chinese felt that they had arrived, that the world was in the palm of their hand. So there is a certain hubristic element to what they are doing vis-a-vis their neighbors. Now, China has 27 neighbors, 27 countries who are China's neighbors, and very few friends among those neighbors. Maybe, of course, Pakistan's there, Cambodia's there. Even North Korea, it's a little iffy. You really don't know, given the very inchoate and very non-transparent nature of North Korean responses to events around them. So I feel that the government has to take stock not only of the situation, but also of the kind of responses that it has to deploy vis-a-vis China. Obviously, these informal summits at Wuhan and Mamallapuram, we also have to assess whether they created that leverage for a good India-China relationship. The jury is out on that. So our summits, more and more of such summits really going to have the effect that they desire. But at the same time, we abandon dialogue with China. Obviously, we cannot, neither side can. And from the Chinese side, maybe they just mouth these diplomatic hyperboles. But from our side, I think we have consistently believed that it is necessary to engage. And that's why we have those 5 protocols, those arrangements for maintaining peace and tranquility and confidence building in the border areas. Suddenly, you can't throw them out the window, as the Chinese seem to have done. Right. And, and also I think there is need for some introspection about what our approach has been to safeguarding our interests along the LAC. Of course, building roads and improving infrastructure is extremely necessary. We neglected it all these years, and we need to make sure that we have access. We are not denied access in any way, least of all because we don't have infrastructure. And we have important assets to protect and preserve. I'm reminded also, now this area, Ladakh, Aksai Chin, it's now, of course, a separate union territory, but traditionally a part of the unified Jammu and Kashmir state. And I remember in 1986-87, when Sundarong-Chu happened, one of the diplomats telling us in Beijing that as far as Aksai Chin is concerned, you can forget any so-called reunification with that area. I mean, that is with us, it stays with us. And you just have to lump it. So this is the kind of attitude. Of course, as far as the eastern sector is concerned, they have a lot of asks of us and a lot of demands, and obviously that's not going anywhere. Both our countries have this approach to safeguarding our territorial claims and our sovereignty. So there is very little give on either side. The least of all that we can do in these circumstances is to have a clearly defined perception of the LAC and how we handle such events in future. Is there some scope for some degree of disengagement from both sides? From both sides. I'm not saying it should be from one side. For instance, between 1975, when the China Study Group was formed, and 1985-86, when Sundarong-Chu happened, we had very few incidents along the border. And I don't think it was just related to our not having infrastructure, because we were still, patrols did go, we still maintained our presence, we still made sure that our flag was flying. But maybe we need to introspect a little about that also. Both sides need to do it. But from our side, that generation of China watchers that we had at that time and boundary experts who had the experience of 1962 did delve very deep into this in order to see how we could avoid this kind of armed confrontation and incidents that really would mean a powder keg going off.
Right. Ajay, I have a rather conceptual sort of a question for you. While both India and China are nuclear weapon powers, China is conventionally far superior to India in terms of conventional weapons are concerned. Just like the India-Pakistan sort of equation, both are nuclear weapon powers, but one is conventionally more superior than the other. So what are India's options if China were to conventionally use its conventional military power against India in order to meet its territorial objectives? So given China's conventional military superiority, would India be forced to accommodate some of China's concerns, just like Pakistan may be forced to accommodate some of India's military objectives, given the conventional imbalance? Or do you think that's not an equation that would play out between India and China?
China and India have a sort of a glaring asymmetry in military power. I agree with you on that point. But that is not to also say that India has to take whatever is dished out by China lying down. I think that just as China has created local superiority in these areas where it has intruded, and it will be difficult for India to sort of physically sort of confront them and throw them out at these points, because China will, as China does, have made adequate provision for an aggressive Indian response. But there are many other options available to India for sort of generating pressure onto China. Nirupama has just given out a large range of diplomatic and geostrategic options. But even beyond that, at the purely military level along the border, India can generate uncomfortable pinpricks for China. The Indian Ocean region is another area where the Navy is well poised for sort of action against China. But all of this is going to amount to sort of nothing unless it's backed by political will. If the government is not willing to confront China, and the belief at the strategic political level is that the cost India would have to pay is too high, and therefore we should seek accommodation rather than seek confrontation, then all your advantages come to naught. And that is something that China and many other countries in the region, notably Pakistan, count on. They count on the lack of political will to take the hard steps that are needed. So while I would be interested in hearing what General Bhatia has to say on this as a former DGMO, I'm of the belief that India can generate military pressure on China at select points of its own choosing. And all that stands between doing so and not doing so is political will. So I'm waiting to see what happens. Will this be resolved by sort of accommodation and seeking accommodation at all costs? There are many who say that the Modi government has got the attitude of a bully, that it can take on Pakistan, it can launch surgical strikes on Pakistan, but when it comes to China, it will sort of decide that accommodation suits its interests better. I'm not convinced of that argument. I'm waiting to see.
Then, Bhatia, do you want to comment on that, on this issue of whether there is whether India can bring on board enough military pressure against China should the need arise?
It is not military to military. It is nation to nation. It's people to people. We have to understand that military is only one instrument of national power. We got diplomatic, we got informational, we got economic means, we got cultural linkages. So we should not just look at the military as a standalone mode, and everything cannot be resolved or confronted in the military manner. We have to look after national interests. What are national interests? What do we really want out of it? So everything cannot be just, but at the military, let me know that Ajay has asked me a direct question, and in the continental part of it, we can stand firm. We have the wherewithal, we have the will, we have the troops, we have the capability to stand firm, and we should not, let's enlarge the scope. It may not be really required. Because these are resolved at the diplomatic level, they establish mechanisms to resolve it, and this is a whole of a nation approach. What you do on the ground is do not blink, no brinkmanship. It is very difficult. We are talking of 5,000 meters. That's the height, 18,000 feet. Temperatures are low, but the tempers always run high. So that is why sometimes you find we sit down and interact very well, get together. We eat together, and sometimes we get to a jostling and a shoving mode, and there's some injuries are caused. So let us not look at the military part of it. Military can stand its ground. Military is capable of it. But then we need to make sure that we upgrade our military capabilities. Like the Mountain Strike Corps is a stillborn corps. It has not been given the wherewithal and the support it is required. So we may have to have a look at it. We will have to build more and more infrastructure, because not only for the defense needs or security needs, but for economic development of our border regions. So this is an ongoing process, and more we do it, the more China will get concerned. But we have to look after own interests, and that is the bottom line. And when we look after own interests, it is not only the military, it is basically the political diplomatic will. What do they do? What does the economy do? Geoeconomics going to play a very, very major part. And we should look at a post-COVID world order, the emerging world order, very uncertain. And India, I suppose, has done well. And in the post-COVID world order, both the US and the China will definitely need India's support. India is a global leader now. We have our say in the world. And that is where I think I will say that India should stand firm. Our principal stance is very clear and very precise.
Right. Ambassador Rao, here is my last question. I think there has been a lot of pushback against India from its own neighborhood in South Asia, be it Nepal, be it Sri Lanka, be it Maldives. And some of this is happening perhaps because of the Chinese influence or the rise of Chinese influence in the region. How do we deal with our neighbors in a proactive manner, keeping in mind the influence that China is exerting on these countries for some time now?
Well, I think our neighbors, at least some of our neighbors, have always tried to play off China against us. So the China factor, even if you delve into the archives of 40, 50 years ago, there has been this tendency. And we have, lived with it, and we have not just coped with it, we have been able to maneuver despite the fact that we face these imponderables. But when it comes to presently how we are to deal with this situation, now it's true that we have a territorial issue between India and China. There is a boundary question, an unresolved question. We make claims on Aksai Chin, they make claims on Arunachal Pradesh. And but this latest series of incidents in Nakula and in the areas near Galwan, they point to another issue, which is more about differences of perception as far as the line of actual control is concerned. It's not about new territorial claims in the classic traditional sense of the word. So I think we should handle it from that point of view. We have a lot of experience, a lot of years of handling such issues on both sides. And as far as our military is concerned, it's highly professional. It's very well equipped to handle a threat from China. Mano a mano, as they say in Spanish. I think we're quite capable of it. I don't think we have to worry too much on that front. But obviously, we don't want a long, drawn-out confrontation with China just to go from bad to worse, as it would be suggested in terms of the numbers of transgressions and how troops are coming to blows over differences. I think that we need, first of all, to obviously the Chinese and Indians need to sit down and defuse the situation, behave like grown-ups, particularly the Chinese. Somebody compared China to Tony Soprano in the TV series The Sopranos. I mean, it's really trying to just throw its weight around. And like we did at Doklam, I think we have to demonstrate that here we are, a big country, but we do business differently. We don't do it in this very non-rule oriented way as the Chinese do, as we've seen. And I think we should brief our friends and partners very, very much in depth about what is happening in these areas. We have a lot of friends and partners in the region, and also we have the United States, of course. I think what Deputy Assistant Secretary Alice Wells had to say about the situation that day was extremely heartening, I felt, and it was a good statement. The Chinese, of course, feel very insecure about this. Let's deepen their sense of insecurity.
Thank you. Ambassador Rao, General Bhatia, Ajai Shukla, thank you so much for joining this conversation.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.